Going to the Golden State Valkyries, you can see that every single emotion was just coming out of everywhere for the Las Vegas.
So the Las Vegas Aces have lost basically their entire team. Almost their entire team is gone from last year. They've lost basically everyone. If we want to look at the Vegas Aces team from last year, who's still remaining? The MVP, Jackie Young, Kelsey Gray. That is it.
I'm here with my dog, my teammate. I'm super hyped to have my girl here. Two-time WNBA All-Star, Kelsey Mitchell. What's good with it?
What's up, man?
Just a year ago, the Las Vegas Aces were unstoppable. Back-to-back WNBA champions, a stacked roster, and a city that treated them like royalty. Today, they're barely holding it together. What happened? Key players have walked away, the coaching staff is under fire, and even Aya Wilson, the face of the franchise, might be the next one out the door. This isn't just an offseason shakeup. This is a full-blown collapse. And more importantly, did the Aces do this to themselves? Because, let's be real, players don't just abandon a championship-winning team for no reason. So, what's really going on behind the scenes? Let's break it down. For the past 2 seasons, the Las Vegas Aces were the team to beat. They had it all: star power, depth, and a coach with back-to-back championships under her belt. Aya Wilson, Kelsey Gray, Jackie Young, and Kelsey Plum weren't just great players. They were superstars. The Aces weren't just a good team, they were a dynasty in the making. Their dominance was undeniable. In 2022 and 2023, they bulldozed their way to back-to-back WNBA championships, proving to the entire league that they weren't just another contender, they were a powerhouse. They led the league in offense, suffocated opponents with their defense, and had a bench deeper than most starting lineups. Every championship team has its strengths, but the Aces? They had everything. Superstar leadership. Aya Wilson was in the prime of her career, playing at an MVP level and anchoring both ends of the court. Scoring firepower, Kelsey Plum and Jackie Young were walking buckets, capable of lighting up any defense on any given night. Defensive grit. Kelsey Gray wasn't just a playmaker. She was the heart and soul of the team's defense. Coaching genius. Becky Hammon, a former NBA assistant, had already proved she could out-strategize anyone in the league. Depth and experience. The Aces weren't just winning with their starters. They had a bench that could step up when it mattered most. For 2 years, it was absolute domination. They were fast. They were aggressive. They were feared. When the 2023 season ended, there was no reason to think their reign would stop. They had their core players locked in, a coach that had proven she could win, and an entire city behind them. The Aces were supposed to be the future of the WNBA. So why, less than a year later, are they falling apart? Why are players abandoning ship from a team that was built for sustained success? Something wasn't adding up. And if you looked closely, the warning signs were already there. Because while the Aces were celebrating their back-to-back championships, the foundation of their dynasty had already started to crack. At first, it was easy to ignore. A couple of players leaving? Normal. Coaching tension? Nothing new. Salary cap issues? Every championship team has those. But then, one by one, key pieces of the Aces' dominance began to disappear. First, it was role players, the ones who don't always make headlines but are critical to a championship team. Then it was star players. Then the coaching staff. And suddenly, what was once a well-oiled machine started to fall apart in real time. This wasn't just a minor setback. This wasn't just an off-season shakeup. This was a full-blown collapse. So where did it all start? It began with something no one saw coming, the exodus of their star players. And once the exit started, they didn't stop. Every championship team expects a little turnover in the offseason. It's normal. Players get new contracts, teams make adjustments, and rosters shift. At first, that's exactly what it looked like for the Las Vegas Aces, just another round of minor changes before another championship run. Until it wasn't. What started as a couple of off-season moves quickly spiraled into a full-blown exodus. One by one, key players packed their bags and left, some for money, some for better opportunities, and some because they just didn't want to be there anymore. And when you look at the names, it becomes clear. These weren't just role players leaving. They were the very foundation of the Aces' championship success. Kelsey Plum, the first domino to fall. Losing Kelsey Plum was a gut punch. She wasn't just a scorer. She was the firepower behind the Aces' offensive dominance. A lethal shooter, a relentless competitor, and the kind of player who could single-handedly change the momentum of a game. Plum was one of the biggest reasons the Aces won back-to-back titles. She could attack from anywhere on the court, spread the floor for Aya Wilson, and create mismatches that left defenders helpless. And yet, she was the first major piece to leave. When she signed with the Los Angeles Sparks, fans were shocked. Why would a star player walk away from a championship-winning team? At first, the answer seemed simple: money. The Sparks offered her a massive contract, and the Aces, already strapped for cap space, just couldn't match it. But was that really the only reason? Because what happened next made it clear, this wasn't just about salary caps. This was something bigger. Alicia Clark, the defensive anchor, leaves. If losing Kelsey Plum hurt, Alicia Clark leaving was a nightmare. Clark was the kind of player that every championship team needs: an experienced veteran, a lockdown defender, and a player who could do the dirty work that didn't always show up on the stat sheet. She was a defensive anchor. She kept the Aces balanced. She was the glue that held the team together in tough moments. And when she left to join the Seattle Storm, it wasn't just a roster move. It was a warning sign. Because players like Alicia Clark don't leave winning teams unless something is seriously wrong. At this point, fans started to worry. 2 key players were gone, and the offseason was far from over. Then came Sydney Colson and Tiffany Hayes. Sydney Colson and Tiffany Hayes, depth completely destroyed. Sydney Colson and Tiffany Hayes weren't the biggest names on the roster, but their departures exposed a serious problem. Colson was a locker room leader, someone who brought energy and kept the team's chemistry strong. Hayes was a veteran presence, a player with experience who could step up when needed. Losing one of them wouldn't have been a big deal. Losing both, that was another blow to the team's identity. And with every exit, it became clear this wasn't just an off-season shakeup. This was a pattern that pointed to something deeper going on behind the scenes. Because when championship teams lose players, they replace them. They reload. They find ways to keep winning. But the Aces? They weren't reloading. They were falling apart. The front office wasn't making big moves to fix things. Instead, they were scrambling, trying to patch up the damage with minimum contracts and last-minute signings. And that's when fans started asking the real question: why were players leaving in the first place? Because if it was just about money, why weren't the Aces doing more to keep them? If it was just about opportunity, why were players choosing teams with worse playoff chances? And if it was just normal turnover, why did it feel like everyone was running for the exit? Clearly, something was happening behind closed doors. Something that the Aces didn't want to talk about. And the biggest theory? It all pointed back to the coaching staff. Which brings us to the next piece of the puzzle, the controversy surrounding Becky Hammon. Winning cures everything, until it doesn't. For 2 straight seasons, Becky Hammon was seen as a coaching genius. She took the Aces to back-to-back championships, outmaneuvering the competition and proving that she wasn't just a former NBA assistant. She was a force in the WNBA. But now, with players leaving in waves, a different narrative is emerging. Some players reportedly weren't happy with how things were being run behind the scenes. At first, it was just whispers. Locker room tensions, disagreements, and frustrations bubbling under the surface. Nothing big enough to make headlines, until the departures started stacking up. And suddenly, those whispers became impossible to ignore. Because here's the thing, players don't just leave championship-winning teams unless there's a serious reason. Was Hammon's coaching style pushing players away? Hammon is known for being intense, demanding, and brutally honest. That's part of what made her a great coach. She held her players accountable, pushed them to be better, and never settled for mediocrity. But there's a fine line between pushing players to be their best and pushing them away. And for some former Aces players, that line may have been crossed. Several insiders have hinted at rising tensions in the locker room. Certain players reportedly felt unheard, frustrated with how decisions were made, and disagreed with Hammond's leadership style. The championship success had masked a lot of those concerns. Winning makes everything easier to tolerate. But now that the team was crumbling, the cracks were fully exposed. Was Becky Hammon losing the locker room? And if so, how did it happen so fast? Compare this to Indiana Fever's approach. If the Aces were dealing with instability, drama, and tension, another team was doing the exact opposite. The Indiana Fever were quietly building something special. Instead of struggling to keep their roster together, they were attracting talent. They had a clear vision. They had leadership that players wanted to play for. And most importantly, they had Caitlin Clark. Players didn't just see the Fever as a better financial opportunity. They saw a future, a team that was making smart moves, a team that was focused on winning, a team where players felt valued. And when you compare that to what was happening in Las Vegas, it wasn't hard to see why players were choosing to leave. Because if you had a choice between a sinking ship and a rising star, where would you go? And that's when the Real panic set in for the Aces. Because this wasn't just about losing role players. This was about losing control. And the biggest problem? Their salary cap situation had already made it nearly impossible to fix things. And that's exactly where things got even worse. Winning championships isn't just about having the best players, it's about keeping them. And that's where the Las Vegas Aces completely dropped the ball. For 2 years, they built a super team. Aya Wilson, Chelsea Gray, Jackie Young, Kelsey Plum, and a strong supporting cast. They had everything they needed to dominate the league for years to come. But behind the scenes, the front office was playing a dangerous game. Because in the WNBA, the salary cap is unforgiving. Unlike the NBA, where teams can pay luxury tax to keep superstars, the WNBA's hard cap means you have to make tough choices. And instead of making the right choices, the Aces made all the wrong ones. Big money, bad decisions. The Aces had 2 priorities this offseason: keep their championship core intact, fill in the gaps with role players who could keep them competitive. They did neither. Instead of carefully managing their cap space, the Aces locked themselves into a financial mess. Chelsea Gray, Jackie Young, and Aya Wilson all deserved big contracts. No one questioned that. But what broke the team was who they decided to spend big money on next. And that's where the Jewell Loyd signing comes in. Jewell Loyd, a risky signing that made things even worse. Jewell Loyd is a talented player. No one is denying that. She can score. She's an experienced veteran. And on paper, adding her should have been a great move. But when the Aces signed her to a near-max contract, it immediately raised eyebrows. Loyd has been inconsistent. Some nights, she's unstoppable. Other nights, she disappears. She's not a natural playmaker. With Plum gone, the Aces needed someone to fill that role, and Loyd wasn't that player. She wasn't the right fit. She's a great individual talent, but in terms of team chemistry, was she really worth the money? By giving Loyd a massive deal, the Aces backed themselves into a corner. Now, they didn't have enough cap space to keep the depth players who had been crucial to their success. The players they lost because of it. Kelsey Plum left. Alicia Clark left. Sydney Colson left. Tiffany Hayes left. And the Aces? They had no money left to replace them with equal talent. So while other teams were making smart moves, bringing in young talent, and signing key veterans, the Aces were left picking up scraps, signing players to minimum contracts, and hoping for the best. And it didn't stop there. Because once players saw that the Aces weren't structured for long-term success, even the remaining free agents started looking elsewhere. Suddenly, Las Vegas wasn't the destination team anymore. And that's when the panic truly set in. Because if they couldn't fix their roster, they were facing a much bigger problem: the possibility of losing Aya Wilson. And if that happened, the dynasty wouldn't just be falling apart. It would be completely over. The WNBA has seen its fair share of game changers, players who come in and completely shift the landscape of the league. But Caitlin Clark? She's on an entirely different level. She isn't just a promising young star, she's a generational talent. And the moment the Indiana Fever landed her in the draft, the entire league knew things were about to change. The Caitlin Clark effect, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. There's something different about Clark. She's not just good, she's box office. She's not just a scorer, she's a leader. She doesn't just win games. She changes the culture of an entire franchise. For years, the Indiana Fever had been struggling. They weren't considered a top destination for free agents, and they certainly weren't in the same conversation as teams like the Aces or the Liberty. But the second Caitlin Clark was drafted, all of that changed. Because now, playing for Indiana didn't just mean being on a young team with potential. It meant being a part of something bigger. It meant playing alongside a player who could redefine the entire WNBA. And for players looking for a stable future, Indiana suddenly became the hottest destination in the league. Indiana Fever's smart rebuilding strategy, planning for a dynasty. While the Aces were scrambling to hold onto their roster, Indiana was doing the exact opposite. They weren't just making moves. They were building a dynasty. The Fever's front office wasn't reacting to problems. They were proactively creating solutions. They built around Clark. They didn't just expect her to carry the team alone. They surrounded her with talent. They made aggressive moves. They weren't waiting for things to fall into place. They went out and made things happen. They gave players a reason to come. Unlike the Aces, who were struggling to maintain stability, Indiana was offering a vision for the future. Key players who saw the writing on the wall. It wasn't just hype that was drawing players in. It was strategy. The Fever's front office went to work immediately, making major signings to complement Clark and turn the team into a contender. Natasha Howard, a veteran presence who brings experience and leadership. DeWanna Bonner, a proven star with championship pedigree. Sophie Cunningham, a versatile player with grit and energy. Sydney Colson, yep, another ex-Aces player making the jump. These weren't random signings. These were calculated moves, each one designed to build a team that wasn't just hoping to win. They were planning for it. Why players are choosing Indiana over Las Vegas. So when Aces players saw how their own franchise was falling apart and then looked at what was happening in Indiana, the decision became obvious. Stay in Las Vegas and hope for the best, or head to Indiana and be part of something historic. The Aces were once the league's dream destination, but now, Indiana Fever was the team every free agent wanted to play for. And that created a very real problem for Las Vegas. Because if players like Kelsey Plum and Sydney Colson were willing to leave, who's to say Aya Wilson won't be next? Which brings us to the biggest question of them all. What is Aya Wilson going to do? Because now, for the first time in her career, she has a very real choice to make. And no matter what she decides, the future of the Aces hangs in the balance. Aya Wilson has never known anything but winning in Las Vegas. She's the face of the franchise, the heart of the team, and the one player who's been holding everything together as the Aces world falls apart around her. But now, for the first time in her career, she's staring down a life-changing decision. Wilson's contract is set to expire soon. Right now, Aya Wilson is still under contract, but not for long. Her deal is set to expire soon, and when it does, she'll have to make the biggest choice of her career. And it's not just about money. It's about legacy. It's about loyalty. And most importantly, it's about whether or not she still believes in this team. If she stays, the last line of defense for the Aces. If Wilson chooses to stay in Las Vegas, it means one thing. She's fighting to keep the Aces alive. She'd be betting on herself, trusting the front office to rebuild, and hoping that she can still compete for championships despite losing half of her supporting cast. She'd be choosing loyalty over an easy way out, proving that she's willing to weather the storm and fight for a franchise that she helped build. But there's a problem with that plan. What if the front office can't fix this? What if they don't bring in enough help? What if she wastes the prime of her career on a team that's already fallen off the map? That's the risk Wilson would be taking. If she leaves, the final nail in the coffin. But what if she decides to walk away? What if she looks at the mass exodus of players, the coaching controversy, and the salary cap disaster, and realizes there's nothing left to fight for? If Aya Wilson leaves, it won't just be another offseason loss. It will be the final nail in the coffin for the Las Vegas Aces. They've already lost their depth. They've already lost their stability. If they lose Aya Wilson, they lose everything. And for the Aces front office, that's a nightmare they never wanted to face. Because no amount of rebuilding will bring back what they had. Once Wilson leaves, the dynasty is officially over. So, is this the end of the Aces dynasty? That's the biggest question of all. Is this just a bad offseason? Or is this the beginning of the Aces' downfall? Can they somehow convince Wilson to stay and rebuild the team around her? Or will she follow the rest of her teammates and leave Las Vegas behind for good? At this point, nobody knows for sure. But one thing is clear. If Wilson walks away, the Aces won't just be losing their best player. They'll be losing their entire identity. What do you think? If you were Aya Wilson, would you stay or leave? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any updates on this story. Because no matter what happens next, one thing is for sure. The WNBA is about to change forever. 1 year ago, the Las Vegas Aces were on top of the world, back-to-back WNBA champions, a roster packed with star power, and a reputation as the most dominant team in the league. Today, they're barely holding it together. Key players are gone. The coaching staff is under fire. Their salary cap situation is a disaster. And now, even Aya Wilson's future is in question. The Aces weren't supposed to fall this fast. But with each passing day, it's looking less like a championship team reloading and more like a dynasty crumbling in real time. So the question now is simple. Can the Aces recover, or are we witnessing the fall of a dynasty? Is there a way for Las Vegas to rebuild, or has this team already suffered too much damage to bounce back? And more importantly, should Aya Wilson even stay? Let's hear what you think. Would you stay and fight for the Aces? Or is it time for Wilson to walk away? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe for more WNBA updates. Because no matter what happens next, this story is far from over. Stay tuned. The WNBA is about to change forever.